Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session will now begin. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the Policy Center for the New South welcomes you to the 8th edition for the Atlantic Dialogues. The first session is about to begin. Please find your translation kits on your seats. Channel 4 is for Spanish. Channel 3 is for French. Channel 1 is for English. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the moderator for the launch of the 6th edition of the Atlantic Current, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, Marcus Vinicius de Freitas.
Right. Thank you. Good morning. So, how are you today? I hope you're excited for a very interesting panel. I don't know whether you have received or you have got a sample or the Atlantic Currents. If you haven't got it, we have that outside and you can always get it, and I hope you will enjoy it, right? So, in order to have this discussion, we have a few people lined up so that we can start the conversation today. Now, if I get the right, we'll start with Anabel González, who was former Minister of Foreign Trade in Costa Rica. So let's give her a warm welcome to the stage. Anabella?
Thank you.
Then we have Ishmael, who is a Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Len? Rida Lyammouri, who is also Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Let's welcome him, too.
Madame's supposed to be before me. Okay.
Now, there's a complicated name. He told me to facilitate the name and to make it easy. So let's have PJ Okocha come over, who is the managing partner and co-founder of PS Nutraceuticals. And finally, we have former Prime Minister of Senegal, Madam Aminata Touré. Prime Minister.
So let's see where we're gonna get it at.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel today. I hope we have a great discussion. Let's give them a hand again. Now, I wanted to start by asking you a question. The topic is the South in time of turmoil. Is the world in trouble now? What do you say? Do we have any problems in the world? Does anyone have a microphone so we can? Like a microphone or no? Oh, here it comes. Is the world in trouble?
Yes, we live a very difficult time in the world. We have a many change. And for example, here is the former president of Ecuador, and we are Latin American citizens, and we live a very hard situation. And is representative of the name of this meeting of the Atlantic Dialogues.
So we think we have problems then.
Yeah.
Now, if you're to list the problems, what would you say they were, President?
Thank you. New problems.
Okay, what are the new problems that we have?
I think the problems with climate, the
Okay.
problems with the new media, the
Right.
spread of internet, the post-truth, the new ways that people can connect among themselves, inequality, different levels of development, so many, many different challenges in the future.
All right, okay. Who else would like to say anything about the problems in the world? Let's hear female voice. Would you like to say something? Anyone else?
Well, I would like to say, besides the South, also the North is in time of turmoil, because it's written the South in time of turmoil, but I come from the so-called North, Italy or Europe.
But Italy's always in problems, right?
Well, exactly.
Just
so,
kidding, just kidding, just
no, I
play,
mean,
yeah.
populism, nationalism, we know all this. So it's a different kind of instability, but it's still unstable.
Now, what would you like to ask them?
Mohamed El Yacoubi, je représente la CGM, je préside également l'ordre des comptables agréés.
Represent the CGM. I represent the accountants of Morocco. I come from a world that is indeed in difficult times, in a globalization that is producing inconsistencies, inequalities. We have to think about it in all fields. We've got to think in terms of social cohesion. We've got to preserve our environment. We've got to think of how we can redistribute wealth, and this is a challenge for all economies, from the north and from the south.
Problems in the world, and I wanted all of them to address this issue. Let's start, Anabel.
So thank you very much, Marcus, and good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So to your question, is the world trade in turmoil? I have to say a resounding yes. For the past 70 years, global trade has been governed by a set of rules based on non-discrimination, transparency, and binding and enforceable commitments on tariffs and other policy instruments. At the center of it, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and before it, the GATT, guarantees that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. And this global framework has brought an unprecedented level of prosperity to the world. It has enabled developing countries to integrate into the global economy through global value chains, helping them raise 1 billion people out of poverty. And by driving demand and consumption, this new emerging middle class has brought economic prosperity worldwide. But the WTO is confronting today a fundamental crisis. And this crisis is driven by a number of US actions and related political and economic concerns. First, the increase in tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum from the European Union, from Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Canada, and other countries using the national security exception. Second, the increase in tariffs on imports from China without first going through the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. And third, blocking the nomination of new members to the WTO appellate body when the term of these sitting members expired. So just 2 days ago, on December 10, this appellate body came to a halt. No, there are not enough members for the body to continue operating. And this, this happens after it was established 25 years, precisely here in Marrakesh, where the agreement to create the WTO was established. So this basically means that today, any losing party in a panel can basically appeal this report, and this report will go into a legal limbo, and the mechanism basically becomes ineffective. That is, we have moved just 2 days ago from a rules-based system to a power-based arrangement, where every trade dispute risks becoming a small or not so small trade war. And if you don't have an effective mechanism for enforcing trade disputes, then the question is, why are you going to negotiate new rules if they cannot be properly enforced? And new rules are required because as globalization shifts, the digital economy and new technology are bringing new challenges to the world economy. So we're basically moving to a system of managed trade, greater fragmentation of trade rules. If you think, for example, what is happening in the digital economy, we see the internet divided with competing spheres of influence. Some people talk about the splinternet, which is not good for the global economy. Now, to be sure, and this is something that you were mentioning to me before, Marcus, there are a number of tensions that underlie the current frictions. And I see particularly 3 of them. First is how to deal with this sort of the complexity arising from the state versus market capitalism. And in particular, whether and how to level the playing field to address state distortions in the market economy through state-owned enterprises, subsidies, forced technology transfer, and others. So that's one set of challenges. A second set of challenges comes from how to deal with this digital economy. Can we deliver a new set of rules to govern that are appropriate to govern the digital age? And the third set of challenges, which I think is very relevant to this forum which we are today, is what role for emerging economies in the global trading system? And in particular, whether the larger emerging economies, who represent today close to 50% of global trade, can continue to claim special and differential treatment in the WTO. So to sum up, I would say that we are at a moment of significant challenges in the area of trade. To be sure, a number of proposals are being put forward by the European Union, by Canada, by a number of other countries to try to save the system. And there is an important ministerial conference scheduled for June 2020 that will look into these issues. But it may be some of these proposals are not gaining traction yet, and it may be, for several reasons, that they will not gain traction by mid-next year. At that time, I think then that all other members who would want to preserve the system need to come together to work towards actively keeping the system in place, the different parts of the system that are in place, to wait until November 2020 to see what will be the results of the election in the US and whether we could move forward to reforming the global trading system.
It's very interesting because Anabel wrote a very good article on the trading system and the crisis that we're having nowadays in the world, and she has just mentioned that. Now, Len, on the other hand, has written about the post-American world. Now, tell us, how does it get into this idea of the South in time of turmoil?
Thank you, Marcus, and it's really a pleasure to be back here at this wonderful conversations over the next few days. So Anabel has spoken about global trade and its importance, and I will take it up to a different level and take a look at what's happening in the world. And to your first question, are we in a sense of turmoil or crisis? And I would say absolutely yes. I think not only are we in a sense of crisis right now, or a place of crisis, but I think importantly that the Western-led liberal world order as we know it is in crisis, and that traditional alliances and partnerships are very much fractured. And I'd like to pose this sort of scenario by taking a look at 3 quick things. One, taking a look at global headlines from about 18 months ago and fast forward into very recently, even in the last few days. Secondly, taking a look at what's happening on the streets of every continent in so many countries around the world, both in mature democracies as well as young democracies, that has to give us pause for concern. And then take a little bit at what's happening in the world at large when we consider shifts in the balance of power. And we'll start off first by global headlines. And I speak personally as well, but I think that many other people here, as well as outside of this room, might share some of the same thoughts. The first, some 18 months ago in July, when the United States new administration spoke about the threat of sanctions on steel, and first put them into place, I was a little bit concerned because I thought it was a miscalculation. After all, the threat was against China, but the United States was importing less than 1% of its steel from China. And in fact, those who were hurt was the United States allies, starting first with Canada, Mexico, the EU, Japan, and South Korea. Well, yes, well, there's happiness in numbers. The United States then pulled out of a number of multilateral accords that it was central to designing and leading, including the Paris Accord, the comprehensive treaty with Iran, and many others that we don't need to go into because I think we all are very much aware. So there was immediately a concern, not only by people like myself, but among traditional allies, that the world as they knew it had shifted with very little by way of consultation. But we fast forward even to the last couple of weeks and the last few days, and we see the US pulling out of China, its 1,000 troops that were there in northern China, pulling them out. Turkey goes in, and immediately the Kurds, who were in an alliance, they thought, with the United States, were immediately asking the Syrian army for protection. I mean, this is completely unprecedented. Japan was hit in July by the news that they had to pay much more for the price of the alliance with the United States. The price has quadrupled to more than 8 billion annually. And at the same time that Japan is trying to exercise its sovereign right with respect to the replacement of the F-2 aging jet fighters and choose between the F-35s, which the United States owned and manufactured, and the UK fighter jet, they are under enormous pressure by the United States to choose and choose wisely, at the same time that they need to pay for the alliance. The Chinese declaration just days ago with respect of within the next few years that all public technical systems are going to be using only Chinese technology. And this, of course, we know what has inspired this. And the demise of the WTO, multilateral institution founded by the United States and its allies, US sanctions, US threat of sanctions just a couple of days ago on Nord Stream 2, the gas line from Russia into northwest Europe, and the EU Commission now having to declare itself as a geopolitical commission. I mean, this is all unprecedented, and we know what inspires it. Now let's take a quick look at what's happening on our city streets in every single continent of the world. And as I said before, I mean, both mature democracies as well as very young ones. Starting with the Yellow Vest in Paris, July last year. We have Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Haiti, Sudan, Lebanon, Malta, Barcelona, the UK, and the list goes on. Discontent and a rebellion against the status quo. A status quo and elitism that the ordinary people on the street do not believe is anymore in their interest. And a disturbing rise of populism and nativism as well. And we take a look now at what's happening in the balance of power. The United States, with its US first policy, has retreated from its traditional role as the superpower, but in a sense also the police of the world. But it has ceded important center ground and center stage for other actors to fill, and that they will be doing, and that they are in fact doing. As China said in Davos 2 years ago, if the United States is not going to protect multilateralism and free trade and globalization, we will. And signed agreements with the EU to do just that. But the US retreat has come at an interesting time. It coincides with the rise of China. And there can be absolutely no doubt that China has, in fact, risen at a rate which is unprecedented in modern as well as in historical times. And the China, which up to fairly recently was very peaceful about its aspirations, a peaceful rise, the dream, is now taking a much more muscular stance on the world stage. So much so that, in fact, on the 1st of October, when China celebrated its 70th anniversary, the president spoke not of a peaceful ride, but said there is no force in the world that can now stand in China's way. And persons who were observing the rise of China had conflicting thoughts about this. One of whom, in fact, I think our moderator here wrote a little paper on the unveiling of a new superpower. Others wrote about a sobering moment. The Australians immediately started a redrafting of their defense strategy put in place only in 2017. Why? Because all of a sudden, they saw military capability that they didn't know existed, but worse is the fact they found that they would now be in the center of geopolitics on a scale that they never knew in their region, and they didn't want to have to choose. And very quickly, I will just say, now, how did we get there? Or why are we even there? 30 years ago, there was a sense of hubris in the West. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989. We had all of the pro-democracy protest in China, in Tiananmen Square. The Soviet Union disintegrated just a year later. And then in 2001, China joined the WTO, a Western-led multilateral institution. The West felt very, very much that capitalism had trumped communism. But 30 years later, that's not where we are at all. China has modernized its economy and has used capitalism principles to modernize its economy. But what we find right now today is that capitalism can exist outside of democracy, and we can have illiberalism in societies that we consider to be democratic as well. Russia, the Soviet Union that disintegrated peacefully, not because of war. We now have a Russia which is resurgent and on the world stage with a power that supersedes its sphere of influence as far away as Venezuela, as well as being a major broker, for example, now in the Middle East, in Syria. So all of this is happening at a time which is very, very interesting, a time of concern, a time which is exceptionalist. So to answer to your question, are we in turmoil? I would say the evidence points, yes, absolutely. And I don't know that even with a new administration next year or 4 or 5 years from now, that trajectory is going to change. Because we have a new world order which is emerging, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to go in a little bit more into this.
Fantastic. And if you want more details, you should read the article on the Atlantic currents. Now, is terrorism also going to be part of this world order that we're building? Rida, what do you say?
Thank you, and great to be here again. I'm going to talk about an area, about a region that it's really close to us from here, and the region of the Sahel, and the issue of terrorism, but also why do we have the issue of terrorism in the first place in the Sahel region, and what it started in just part of Mali, in northern Mali, and now is expanding to neighboring countries, expanding to Niger, Burkina Faso, and also, as we know, also around the Lake of Chad in Nigeria and Cameroon and Chad. We have to understand first, how did we get here? How we arrived to this situation, and how now coastal states are also concerned. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin also concerned about what's happening and also expanding to their areas. If you ask anyone, it might be, oh no, this is a stretch. This is not. it's not going to happen in Ghana as well or Cote d'Ivoire, but myself in 2012, when we started talking about Burkina Faso and Niger, and especially Burkina Faso, you will think, no, there is no way it's going to happen in Burkina Faso. But then, we can't be naive of seeing this expand into coastal states. To go back to my point of how we got here, it started in northern Mali and then expanded to central Mali, to Niger, Burkina Faso, as the audience mentioned, because of different factors, inequality, marginalization, intolerance, climate change, etc. And these countries were not prepared to face those challenges. There was no strategy in place, and still no concrete strategy in place to defeat terrorism, but also additional conflicts that emerged from terrorism. Terrorism is new to the area, but when we look at it, in 1990s, for example, there was no terrorism in the Sahel. It was mostly drug trafficking, for example. They come in and they exploited corruption, for example, in northern Mali. These states, and when we look at the issues where they're taking place not in the main cities, but they're taking place in marginalized areas where the government have little presence and sometimes absent. But doesn't mean that those areas were not governed and there is no sort of governance, but they were governed differently through traditional authorities, for example. But then these traditional authorities started to lose legitimacy by the presence and the influence by drug traffickers, money coming in, they're easily bought, and they're losing legitimacy among their population. Then also you have politicians coming in from capital cities to buy traditional authorities so they can, for political gain. Increasingly, they lost their legitimacy, and then other groups, different actors came in and they exploited this division among communities, and we continue to see it today. The issue of terrorism, it's just a title that we put, but the conflict, it's much, much deeper than that. It's the issues of governance, the issues of as we said, marginalization. And there is no concrete solution so far. And after 7 years, almost 7 years after the French intervention, after the UN presence in the Sahel region, the issue have not been resolved, instead expanded. So there are a lot of questions to be asked. What have we done? What could we do differently to move forward and prevent escalation from expanding to coastal states? And I'll stop here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. And also, now, BJ, in your article, he says that one of the reasons for terrorism to be on the rise is lack of governance, unemployment. Now you want more technology in agriculture.
Yes, that's correct.
So more people are going to be unemployed. How do you want to
That's
solve
correct.
that?
I mean, I think first to answer the question, is the world in a state of turmoil? Yes, it is. The world is in flux. That's evident. But what you also see as well is that you also see an imprint of ideology taking place as well. Case in point being countries such as Russia and China and so forth. You see them really stamping their ideological imprint on how they see the world and the way the world is going to be shaped for the next few hundred years. For instance, we know in China, we know that the One Belt, One Road initiative essentially is a modern facelift of the ancient Silk Route, and whereby China essentially is, with the strength of their economy and their population and their manufacturing prowess, essentially is looking at viewing the world in terms of a global marketplace, and they're establishing infrastructure in by land, by rail, by sea, and so forth. As my esteemed colleague said, when looking at Russia, we also know that yes, the disintegration of the USSR did take place, but what we also see as well is that there's a newfound ambition in Russia as well. We've seen with the annexation of Crimea, they've extended their territory and so forth, giving them access to the Black Sea. We've seen their increasing involvement in the Middle East and the Mediterranean, which essentially serve as points to further their gas diplomacy, like I like to call it. We see Nord Stream 2 and the passage of natural gas going through the Nordic states, terminating in Germany, which, as we know, is Europe's manufacturing and economic powerhouse. And we also see instances of collaboration as well. We know that Russia and China as well are collaborating, despite their ideological imprints being put in place. The Shanghai Cooperation and so forth, we see that taking place. We know that Russia as well is providing, China with access to energy, as well as the Central Asian countries as well. Now, in Africa, we must ask ourselves a question. We see that there's an ideological imprint being put in place by these respective countries that I mentioned. What are we as a continent, as a people doing? What are we doing to prepare ourselves? What are we trying to put in place for the next 100 years? How do we view the world? How do we view ourselves, and how do we view ourselves in context of the global world? And that's not being put in place at present. But what we do need to realize is that we have the youngest population in the world. It's the fastest growing population in the world. Africa has, 60% of the uncultivated land in the world. We have access to water resources. We have resources both on the ground and underneath the ground. But most importantly, the greatest resource that Africa has is human capital potential, which is being grossly underutilized. Grossly underutilized. So agriculture itself, we know and we see that in the agricultural space, what should normally be a strength, we're actually punching far below our weight. We need to see what we have as an opportunity essentially to feed the entire world, whereby we need to also look at geography and say that we know that from Africa to Vladivostok, which essentially is Russia's Far East, is one contiguous landmass, really, in the scheme of things, which accounts for 3/4 of the world's population. We know countries like China, their water tables are diminishing. We see countries we see the GCC countries as well, who are essentially are buying or entering into long-term leases with countries for their food security. So that presents a unique opportunity to Africa. And what we need to do is this: we need to put the requisite enabling environments in place to harness our agricultural potential. We see that youths are migrating en masse from rural areas to urban areas in search of jobs that are few and far between. The young person today doesn't want to delve into agriculture. It's not sexy. Agriculture is not a sexy thing for them to do. Nobody wants to do the backbreaking work of their forefathers with the cutlass and the hoe and so forth and everything like that. But the key actually is marrying it with technology to pique the interest of the youth. You are starting to see in the African continent a lot of disruptive innovation and technology taking place. And more young people are, as a result of that, are starting to delve into that. For instance, we're using a technology called aeroponics, which essentially is soil is growing, and we're using it to propagate yam, which essentially is one of the most important crops in West and Central Africa. We're seeing drone technology being applied. We're seeing blockchain technology being applied. We're seeing mobile money as well coming into the fore and mixing with technology, giving farmers, access to marketplaces and so forth and everything like that. So that really can be a key driver of growth. It can create job creation. And you see one important thing, as my esteemed guest to the left said as well, is that we're seeing a rise in terrorism. I mean, that ultimately stems from youth restiveness. An idle mind essentially is the devil's playground. You need to keep those, they must be occupied. There has to be some form of employment. There has to be a pathway towards social mobility. And agriculture is that low-hanging fruit to enable us to do that. So we must begin to look globally as well and say, hey, listen, we have what we need. We have the population. We have the arable land. We have the water resources to feed ourselves, also to feed the rest of the world as well. And I think if the requisite enabling environments are put in place, we'll see African nations and economies begin to boom as a result.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Prime Minister Touré, you're sitting by His Majesty King Mohammed VI of Morocco. And imagine that you're having a conversation with him, and he asks you, okay, so there's problem with trade, Americans will be gone, I have problems with terrorism, agriculture in Africa. So what do we do in Africa? What is the future? What can we do to make things better?
Well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be sitting next to...
He's strategically sitting by His Majesty, right?
Actually, we are very close countries. We are enjoying very friendly and very productive relationship with Senegal. I'm from Senegal. Before I get to your questions, maybe to come back to the topic of this, this panel, the question was, are we in turmoil?
Yes.
Well, just to say, because we have also young people that we have to inspire and make them optimistic, this is not a new question to the humankind. We've been asking this question over history. Every time you have a cycle where the rulers would be challenged and a new cycle is in view, people would ask themselves, are we in a good place or are we moving to a better place? I think that's the question we are facing now. And I have to be, I feel optimistic about it. I talk about the relationship we're enjoying with Morocco based on, mutual respect, on, economy, on culture. And that's what we are seeing in some part of the world now. So who is in crisis and who is not, or who is in between, is maybe the question to be asked. From my standpoint, which is West Africa, of course, we do have challenges linked to security, and it's a big one. We should not underestimate that. But at the same time, we do have a lot of things to celebrate. From Senegal, where I am, we enjoyed a 6.5 economic growth. I think that's huge. And we've been sustaining it for the past 7 years. And we're optimistic that it's going to continue. That's what we would like to do. But globally, as Africa, you're from Nigeria. Nigeria is the first economic power of Africa. That's no longer South Africa. And people don't realize that. So we have, even within our own continent, things moving around. And those countries that were seen as hopeless are emerging in strong ways. Although Nigeria still have to face security in the north, it's enjoying also sort of an economic blossom. And that also is part of the narrative. So I would like also to sort of balance things. Over time, over my own lifespan, I'll leave a bit longer than that, we enjoyed...
The microphone.
We enjoyed...
Let me use this one.
Thank you very much. So I was saying that over my own lifespan, I have witnessed increase of many social indicators. When I was in primary school, there were very few girls in the classroom. Now we have equal access to at least primary school in Senegal. You have actually, for the exam to go to the next level after primary school, there were more girls sitting than boys. This is sort of, unseen revolution that are going on. We do have universal access to drinkable waters in many places, including Senegal. As I said, health, the life expectancy has, increased a lot. So you do have also good news mixed with challenges, and I think that's the way to look at it. Security, to come back to security, is important. That's an area where we need to collaborate. In the way we are organized is through, economic zones. You do have ECOWAS, you do have SADC, and what I see is, over boundaries, building some corporations that would address security. And we have to also be thankful to the friends who are coming in. You have the UN, you have France, you have other forces, but you also have ECOWAS forces to address and support a brother country like Mali, like Burkina Faso, etc. So I think, although we are talking about globalization, we are coming back also to some forms of regionalization to address issues that are very specific to countries. So that's a part of the issue. And we do see very important progress and leeways when it comes to addressing issues. We talk about young people. There is one question that has also to be asked, and we discussed that when we were preparing the panel. the size of populations. I mean, that's something we hear often, that, African population is growing maybe too fast and what to do about it. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's an opportunity if young people are trained, if young people have vocational training, if we create enough jobs and we can see the opportunities in agriculture. But if we don't do that, we can see the other side of the story, would be despair, young people groups that would sort of engage into terrorist activities. So this is a question of leadership too, that is posed to us. What kind of development strategies based on mutual collaboration and respect we could put forward to address these issues. So we are in turmoil, but at the same time we are seeing great areas of optimism and progress, and how can we mitigate the minuses and increase the pluses? That's how I look at it. And I do believe that we do have to increase the opportunities within the South-South cooperation. I talked about the relationship between Morocco and Senegal, but also within ECOWAS and within, southern countries, and even, inviting China also to learn from them. I mean, they have accelerated their growth over time. They have reduced very quickly the number of poor people. So how can we be inspired at that? How can we also continue, to enjoy nice relationship with our old friends? We don't trade them off. That also is to be said. But we are expanding our numbers of friends, and all of that based in mutual respect. And you cannot talk about turmoil and not address the issue of immigration, which is some of the tension point between Europe and Africa, and that also we have to sit and have a very serene discussion. Africans are migrating mostly within Africa. 90% of migrant African migrate within the continent. So that is something we have to say also when we talk about immigration. And some poor countries are bearing the weight of huge numbers of refugees within Africa. But when you have an attack in one part of the border, usually, the population move to the other side, and they are welcome because that's how we look at it. Frontier are very sort of young in the history of Africa. It came with colonization. Otherwise, we used to move around based on affinities we have here and there. So that is something we have to look at. The regional cooperation also, I talked about ECOWAS and how we are making sure that we harmonize our legal framework, how we collaborate when it comes to security and all. I think one of the solution of sort of moving forward is to redefine, the commonalities we share. And that's why I am always happy to come here to the Atlantic Dialogue, because it's the way to connect to each other and find new ways of rekindling human cooperation, because that's what we have seen over time, over the time of history. There are some dark times where people sort of, sort of close themselves, I would say. But most of the time, if you look at history in the long run, we collaborated a lot, we exchanged cultures, we exchanged knowledge, and that's the way forward, actually. So we are in turmoil, but let's reflect about how we can sort of redynamize the relationship we had, over, the space we share, which is the Atlantic, but which is the world, which is the region, in a more participatory way. I think that's one of the issues. If we are in turmoil, that's because we are seeing in many places and countries an increase of inequality gaps. And that, we have to address it very seriously. People who came from France saw how difficult it was to come with the strike. When you look at TV, what's going on in Chile, what's going on in many places also in Africa. So I think it speaks also to inequalities that we have to face and address it from a political point of view, and very aggressively, if we want to make sure that young people have hope in the future. Because in a continent like Africa, 70% of the population is below 35. You got to give hope, not only in words, but in action to that population if you want to get out of the turmoil or, stay away from turmoil. So that is also something that we have to look at. But I'm a strong believer in international cooperation, international peace, in multilateralism. We have produced lot of good example. I can cite HIV/AIDS. I mean, that's through international cooperation that we got rid of AIDS mostly. Now we are sort of managing the effects. But as a pandemic, I think we manage as a human society to address that. We can do that in many other topics, youth, women. We didn't talk about women. That is an important piece. Addressing all the rights of women over the board. I think as an international community we can do that and support each other where we are, and that's what of the objective I believe of this dialogue. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now before we go to have questions, I just wanted to ask two questions. Len, is it Trump's fault? Because one of the things we see is that despite everything that has been said about President Donald Trump, the U.S. hasn't engaged in any wars compared to what his predecessors did. So is Trump the one that's sparkling and making things get worse for the American liberal order or not?
I think it's an interesting question. No, there are no new wars. And
just trade wars.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
Everything is a trade war now.
No, but I'm going to come to that. Precisely that point. In ancient times, when there was friction between a rise in power and one perhaps that was trying to hold on to its place and maybe descending, the accommodation was through war. We're not getting the sense that it will be more war in the military way of the past. But there can be absolutely no doubt that with Trump, we see a weaponization of economic policy in every realm that we can think of. So power and might, in fact, have many different dimensions. And economic power is a might that we are seeing weaponized, and certainly in the issue of the trade sanctions and the tit for tat. There's no other country in the world that could have stood up to this onslaught by the United States in the way that it has, but China, because it is able to retaliate. So I would say yes, what President Trump has done, even in the use of using trade and development cooperation policies as a weapon in the fight against illegal migration with Mexico, as we saw earlier this year, to great effect, is an entirely different use of the principle and the thought of might and where it takes us. And I say yes, two things. One, President Trump's policies are very frontal, and this is the nature of his administration. But I don't think it's also his fault completely, because we saw a shift in the United States from even before, a reluctance of the people of the United States to go to war in which they don't feel that they have a compelling national interest. So I think when President Trump is no longer the CEO of the United States, we're not necessarily going to see the United States coming front and forward anymore in this sense of policing the world. So I think that there are certain measures. The language will change, and certainly the thought of the EU as the number one foe of the United States will also change if there's a new administration. But I think there's a long-lasting trend that we are seeing, and the issue of war is war by a different name.
Now, and Anabel, you said one thing that I think was interesting, and The Economist also covered that some time ago. There are two models that are incompatible: the capitalist model of the United States and the state-owned enterprises model of China. Is this clash going to be constant? I don't see China changing. What will happen?
Well, that explains the importance of trade rules, because trade rules are in place precisely to help manage those frictions. Because it's not that the world is going to live only under one system. you're going to continue to have different systems. The question is, how can these two systems coexist? And it's not really, the question is not just because we are having trouble designing the rules to minimize frictions, the answer to that is not to decouple. The answer to that is more global cooperation. So I think what part of the tensions that we are seeing today is that there is a view that we need to move forward with these new rules to address, as I was saying, the state distortions in the economy. And there are others that basically say either China changes or we are going to favor a decoupling from China. And I think the confrontation between those two views is, in a way, what has us where we are today.
Fantastic. I should remind you that China doesn't call it trade war, they call it trade frictions. That's the official line of the Chinese government. Now, we say in Brazil, my country, that you cannot light a candle to two saints, right? You have to pick one. In this world of turmoil where you have the United States on one side and China, what do you do, Prime Minister? Which saint do you light a candle for? Is that right?
We do both. We, as I say, we don't want to trade our old friends for new ones, so we expand families. We are good at it in Africa. The more, the merrier. And I think everybody has an advantage to offer. But we also are very interested in looking at the Chinese experience because they were able, in a very short time, to reduce the number of poor. That's what Africa is looking forward to. Of course, you have to compare things. I mean, Chinese civilization is, a whole thing of its own. But yet, there are some strategies we can learn from. We are very interested also in what the U.S. has to offer. That's the first, no matter what you say, it's the first economic power, although not in numbers anymore. It's China. So I think we are sitting, in a big table, and we also look forward. As I said, I'm a believer in multilateralism. The United Nations has also a role to play to be a convener. So you don't have to choose between this one and the other one. I mean, those times are over. But a lot of sort of see where our comparative advantages are. A country like Senegal is very close to France. That's why I'm speaking French rather than Spanish. So there also we are sharing a lot of things culturally and economically. So I think Africa can be an honest broker. We don't see ourselves being involved in any economic friction, as it said, or economic war. What we want is fair deals with each of them, either China or the US. And I think that's the way the African Union see itself, sort of talking to the rest of the world, advocating for new paradigm based on fairness, which is very important. We don't feel like Africa has been treated fairly over history. So things are changing with the new generation of leaders, and that's what we see. And before talking to the rest of the world, what we are looking forward is being together. We want to build a being togetherness within Africa, and I think that's one of the objective of the leadership of the African Union, meaning the groups of presidents. Of course, we have to sort out some of our internal issues. Of course, making sure that we go through fair elections, that we respect human rights, etc., because we are part of the international community. We don't want to disconnect ourselves, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we have more teeth and stronger sort of comparative advantages within ourselves. I can be very specific when it comes to West Africa. Our biggest country is Nigeria. So Nigeria itself is half of the population of the rest. So we also oftentimes going through, some minor difficulties that we try to work out. As you know, there were some border issues with Nigeria and its neighbors. We have to come in. I mean, the leadership of the ECOWAS had to intervene, to sort of calm down issues. So that's the way I look at it. We want to put our house in order. We want to be strong. We want to stay also loyal to our older friend, but we want to welcome our new friends. and what happened at the international scene, we bring the voice of reason, and the UN has to also be a convener and other regional grouping. So I think I'm not despair about the way the world can come back to some order. And as you said, one of the big players didn't go to war for the past 4 years, which is a good news. No matter what the rhetoric is, the most important thing are facts. And I think one of the reasons is war is going to change its face. Now we are not talking about official wars, but terrorism is enough of a war, and we have to address it collectively and be in solidarities every time we face these issues.
Fantastic. PJ, what do you say?
Yes.
Should we light a candle to China or to the US? The Chinese are probably going to buy more agricultural products from Africa than the Americans. What do you say? Do you agree with the Prime Minister?
So I think, let me first touch on one point which he made, in that we really, as a continent, need to first look inwards. Most importantly, we must look inwards. I like to call it, there must be a decolonization of the mindset as well as the lines that have been put in place. It's absolutely critical. We need to know who it is we are as a people, and we need to work together. We look at intra-Africa trade, it's a paltry 12 to 15%. We have to begin to foster economic ties. We need to begin to trade amongst ourselves. It's absolutely critical. That's the only way that Africa is going to grow. As you see, as she also touched upon as well, ECOWAS is in a bit of an uproar because Nigeria has closed its borders. And in accordance with ECOWAS protocol, ECOWAS is supposed to enable the free movement of goods and people. But closing the border essentially is a reactive and retrogressive policy. And is primarily being closed, for agriculture. Agricultural produce that's coming in through the ports in Benin and Togo and being smuggled across the border. And so the administration currently in place is saying that, okay, why aren't we growing these respective things in our country? And my counter to that is the requisite enabling environment isn't being put in place. How do you, is the right financing being accorded to farmers? We can't, when you have interest rates that are in the double digits, anywhere from 20 to 25%, how can you extend that to a farmer? How is a farmer going to be able to pay that back? It's simply exorbitant. It's not possible. Insurance, infrastructure, all these things are impeding the agricultural sector from growing. And also, we also, as Nigeria as a country, we also have to begin to extend our soft power as well, especially in the ECOWAS region. We know that we have a lot of natural gas, the largest reserves in Africa. What's stopping us from saying, Benin, Togo, Ghana, all the way up to Senegal, we want to extend natural gas across to you? So you can industrialize, you have constant electricity, manufacturing, the agricultural sector as well can come on stream and on board, more jobs are created and so forth. So in turn, what you end up seeing is that the reliance on imports from external nations reduces, and we're essentially producing our own goods and food and so forth and stuff like that, and trading amongst ourselves. That's really the way to bolster this, to bolster ECOWAS and the economic and the movement of free goods and people and so forth. So that's absolutely critical. I don't believe we shouldn't choose one in favor of the other. We should continue to build upon our relationship with China. We should continue to build upon our relationship with the US. And like I said, we need to really look at geography. I'm going to reemphasize that as well. Africa is one contiguous landmass to the Far East. We need to look at ourselves and say, hey, listen, there's an opportunity for us to begin to to extend ourselves, to have ties, to have trade relations with these countries that go along this this geographic expression. So yes, we're not choosing one in favor of the other, but we're looking at it as Africans first and saying, okay, listen, how do we galvanize and take advantage of what we have to essentially trade with the rest of the world?
Fantastic. And Rida, final question here. in this time of turmoil, hysteria is going to increase in Africa.
I'm sorry?
With this time of turmoil, hysteria is more likely to increase in Africa.
Absolutely, and it will increase, and we have seen that in the last, at least in the last couple months, in terms of the violence is spiking in the region. I'm speaking about the region that I know very well, and then we will see different types of terrorism as well, because these groups are very creative, very innovative. They will challenge whatever measures you will have in place. So if we don't build a resilient communities to counter that and prevent them from coming in and coming in with the new types of terrorism, we will always face that challenge. So in the short term, I definitely see an increase in violence and terrorism, but in the long term, we don't know. That's something that we have to approach with caution, and also we have to look at it differently. Different. That's what I just said. Is different types of terrorism will emerge, as we have seen also cyber terrorism as well. So there are different challenges that we face with terrorism in the region.
Fantastic. Now, any questions? Go ahead, sir. Now, I need a microphone. Let me use it here. Okay, here on the left, right. You, sir. Let's do 3 questions at a time. Now, let us know your name, where you come from, and all that.
All right. My name is João Bosco Monte. I'm from the Brazil Africa Institute, from Brazil. So the name of this event, the session, the South is in the time of turmoil. And look into the statement of the Prime Minister. I think we may change time of hope. Because if you come to this place, and if you leave this place without hope, there is no reason to be here. So we need to leave this place with the possibility to think that the world has a solution. And the solution that we may think to address is to bring employment, especially for young people. So if you do not bring young people to the discussion, if you do not give hope to the young people, we cannot have hope as well. But for us to have hope and giving to young people opportunities and employment, we need to include in the discussion the role of the private sector, the companies that moves the country and the region. So the question maybe for the panelists is how can we include the private sector in the discussion to bring a hope to the young people?
Okay, we'll hold that up. I think Anabel can answer that after this, right? How we can include the private sector. Now, let me move to here, and then we'll go back here. Yes, sir?
My name is Hung Tran, formerly from Vietnam. Now I live in the U.S., Washington. One of the key reasons for the turmoil we are in now originated not from the South, but from the North, from the mature democracies, the disenchantment, the dissatisfaction, the resentment of many citizens in the US and Europe because they felt that they were left behind with globalization, global trade, technology, and so on. And therefore, the populist backlash that we have seen, which likely will continue to grow even more in the future. Now, my question to the panel is, since the origin of the turmoil that impacting the South comes from the North, and therefore the solution of that particular source of turmoil has to originate from the North, what can the South do to get out of this problem, these challenges, and bring in a new order?
Now, Prime Minister, can you address that in your answer? Hold on one second. One third question here. You, sir, hold on one second.
Bonjour, moi je vais m'exprimer. I'm going to speak in French. Ante Montagna, the Afrimag Publications directed my question. Now we're living in a world where compensation of capital, remuneration of capital is the priority of the leaders since the 80s. And this continues today with Trump. Not Reagan, sorry, I said Reagan. No, it was back in the 80s. And other leaders. And we see the consequences of this on the environment and the economies of the weakest countries. Do you have solutions to propose? Are there any solutions you can table to the world? Thank you. Thank you.
Now, that is a difficult question. A solution to Len, do you want to address that?
I was not wearing my headphones,
Okay,
unfortunately,
hold on.
so I got part of the question.
Okay, can you repeat the question, sir?
No,
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter la question?
no, it's the translation of the question.
C'est la traduction de la question, puisque je n'avais pas porté le casque. Madam, we are living in a world where the remuneration, quote unquote, of capital since the beginning of the 80s is the rule. And we see the disastrous consequences of this economic policy on the environment and on our economies, mostly of those of developing countries. Do you have any solutions to table?
And the solutions for hold on one second, for the economic development. One final question on this round. You, sir, wanted to ask a question?
Ma question est pour Madame.
My question is to Madame Anabel. We just learned that the United States did refuse to appoint the two judges of the Court of Appeal of WTO. Are we at the beginning of the dismantling of this multilateral tool?
Let's do. Anabel, we start with you.
All right. Let me maybe first start with the question on the role of the private sector.
Okay.
And I'd like to say that the role of the private sector is critical to generate jobs. It's critical to increase growth, and it's critical to promote innovation. But private sector cannot thrive in an environment of uncertainty. So this is why it's very important that we are able to bring rules that are applied effectively to all participants so that private sector can continue to thrive. It is an environment with certainty, with predictability, that private sector can continue to grow. If we look at what is happening today, trade policy uncertainty is driving growth down across the world. Many companies are holding their investments because they don't know exactly what is going to happen. That is not good for growth. That is not good for job creation. That is not good for the young populations that are in need of employment in many places in the world.
Okay. Should the solutions come from the north? Okay, all right.
Sorry for the technician. Well, I think the turmoils come in many directions. And the base of the turmoil, as I said, is the widening of inequalities, whether it's in the north or the south. We also do have our homework to do. But when it reaches a certain point, it triggers such frustration that you have disorder. And that's what we've been seeing. The left behind in the north, or the massive also left behind in the south. PJ said that we are seeing young people moving toward the cities. But what you have also is, huge pocket of poverty in cities and rural areas being also sort of left over. So I think the whole idea around social justice is posed to all societies. And it transcends ideology. We are in the world where no longer poor people can accept to just sit and watch because they're more educated than their fathers and mothers. They have more access to information through the democratization of internet and etc. So I think it's not a matter of north and south. It's us as the human community. How do we want to treat each other? Do we have to look into our economic processes, as it was said, that violate the basic rule of environment and create more turmoil? We know that there are some islands that are going to disappear in 10 years in the Pacific. And they are not responsible for it. They are responsible for the type of industrialization we've been having. So this is also turmoil, but that's an opportunity to bring us together. It's unfortunate that the last COP, some of the big countries, the US didn't attend. And that has to change because we are here as a community of humans, and there is no way that we can protect ourselves and believe that nothing is happening. That's the same with terrorism, as a matter of fact. You're seeing it in all places. You can only pray that it doesn't come to you, but you have no insurance that it might happen. So I think it's a difficult time, but at the same time, it's a moment where we can sit and define a new order. And we have to do that in Africa because we have the pushing pressure of our youth that are the majority. If you want to be elected, if you want to stay on power, you better address their needs and rights in a very proactive way. I totally agree that private sector is part of it. It's not to the states to create jobs. That's companies that create jobs. And it comes back to PJ's point. In Africa, intra-trade in Africa is only 3%, which is the first problem. It is 60 to 65% in the rest of the world, within Asia, within Europe, but in Africa it's 3%. If we address that, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But how to do that is the question. And the question is posed to our states as leaders, and it's posed also to the African Union.
Oh, fantastic. Now, Len, what about the environment? Should we be worried about the environment too?
As in the natural environment, climate change?
Yes. What's going on with the environment?
Well, yeah. I mean, I come from the Caribbean. I work a lot with small island developing states, and they're on the front lines of everything that's happening with climate change, even though, in fact, their footprint is so small. And climate change for these islands is an existential threat. It's not even something which is in the future. It's happening right now. Hurricanes and cyclones are getting increasingly more violent in the islands. 2 years ago, we had 4 Category 5 hurricanes come through the islands, wiped out GDP per capita growth for about 20 years. So it is something that we're going to have to deal with. I mean, for the first time, however, I think this year we see an increasing crescendo of voices, not only from the usual suspects like small island developing states, but across the world saying, this is no more, and there is an emergency, and we're all going to have to deal with it. But I wanted to just pick up on 2 quick things that were also raised. One was the issue of inequality. Inequality has been put very firmly at the heart of everything that globalization has done so far. People in the rich world have said it's because jobs have been taken away, it's because of free markets and all of those sort of things. But we have only to look at the little country of Bolivia. Bolivia was one of the poorest countries in Latin America. Under the former president's 14-year term, he was able to reduce absolute poverty from 60% to 30% and grow GDP per capita from 1,000 to almost 4,000 US dollars in less than 14 years. And he did so administratively through progressive systems of redistribution. So it's not the fact that wealth is not being created enough so that everybody can share in it. It's because the policies that are required in the richer world to make sure that those who are at the lower end also get a fair share has not, in fact, taken hold. So that in the United States, we see the top 1% after 2008, 2009, instead of holding on to 60% of wealth, now own 90% of wealth. So we see increasing polarization and not less. And the last quick thing that I wanted to say with respect of hope for the youth in Africa, given the demographic divide, which is a double-edged sword. Yes, it is. Because if you've got almost 900 million young people in the next coming decades who do not have good prospects for jobs, you have a continent, the closest continent to Africa, which is Europe, which is aging rapidly, and that threat is Europe's economic and social stability and its prosperity. Surely, in that demographic discussion, there are seeds for a true partnership, a real partnership based on trust and mutual respect, so that Africa and Europe can combine resources to provide the training, the skills that are required, both for Africa's development as well as to subsidize what needs to happen as well in Europe. It could be a win-win, but it's going to take a lot of exceptional leadership in this moment, in this time, to deal with all of these issues and have the political courage to deal with them. And I think exceptional leadership today is lacking, even whilst we speak of hope. But it's going to take that kind of leadership.
Fantastic. Win-win is the phrase that I hear the most in China. Now, I have time for 2 quick questions, because I was told we have 5 minutes, so we'll do You and you in the back, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the panelists. Very quickly,
Your name and where are you from?
My name is Ángel Losada. I'm the EU Special Representative for the Sahel. Then my question goes directly for what has been said on the Sahel. I mainly share the situation as has been analyzed. Actually, if you don't know, yesterday has been a terrible attack in Niger with 70 soldiers who have been killed yesterday. This comes after what happened in France the other day. I mean, the situation is worsening, but the situation is worsening, and unfortunately, we are not facing a good area. But nevertheless, when it has been said that there is no strategy, yes, there are strategies. There is one strategy, for instance, the EU established in 2011.
I need your question.
Yes, a strategy on the Sahel with links, security, and development. And that's how the way we have to work. The problem we have today, 17 strategies. You don't think that the main problem now is a problem of coordination of all the different strategies like the G5, the EU, the P3S by the French, on security and development. That's the main question, and I think we have to face a real problem of coordination today.
Okay,
Thank you.
fantastic. Now, do I have any woman that wants to ask a question? Because I need to make sure that I have gender balance in my question. Is that? No? No women? Okay, all right. Don't blame me. Okay, there is one. Yours will be the last. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Yours will be the last question.
Maureen Chibo is my name, from Nigeria. I publish Real News Magazine online. You talked about Len. I want you to address this question. You talk about New World Order. I want to know how disruptive the New World Order will be to the countries of the South, especially Africa.
Okay, so Rida and Len.
Okay. Can I quickly say to you that I see this very much as an opportunity for the South, and let's say the global South, because the evolution that we have in right now is perhaps two superpowers with many great powers. You have the rise of China. Some people like to say China is a junior superpower by whatever name. China's roots are in the South. So if we have a bipolar configuration in which you've got a big power who is rooted in the South and has friends as well among us, it gives us a wider menu of options. That's the very first thing. We also have great powers in the making: Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, Nigeria. All of these countries are very much southern countries. We're able now to coordinate our efforts to be able to translate growing economic power into the political capital required to, at the global level, influence and lobby for our own agenda. That can only be a good thing. We've spoken about South-South cooperation. The more of us who are able with economic power to build bridges and work together South-South towards a common agenda, that too is a good thing. And more South-South cooperation builds the sort of trust that is required for us to deal with frozen conflicts that we've seen even among ourselves in the South. So I don't see it as a disruption. I see it as a major opportunity if we are able to adequately organize ourselves to make use of this opportunity.
Rida.
Yes, thank you for the question. And there are plenty of strategies. There are definitely strategies on paper, but unfortunately, there is personally, as an analyst, as a researcher, and what I see on the field, I spend a lot of time on the field in rural areas, including conflict-affected areas. And the narrative that I get from the local population is that they haven't seen the results, including on the borders area, in the border areas. The French intervention, for example, so their mandate is very clear. And when I talk to local communities, and they say, yes, they have done a really good job, good job of chasing the bad guys from the key towns, key cities. They don't control territories, but they continue to operate. They continue, as we saw yesterday, before yesterday, the attack on Niger-Malian borders. And in the past month as well. So and also they're changing their strategies on how they operate and how the attack before yesterday, as I said, the different types of terrorism and the complex attacks they do. They disrupted communication, and so they can carry those attacks, and so the response will not come on time. the relationship between security and development, and that's the key question. There's with the Sahel G5, there is security side, but also Alliance du Sahel working on development issues, but the results are not there yet. Security measures have had a very negative impact on communities on the borders. When they were neglected in the past, then comes 2012, security measures were in place, and who was hurt first? Those communities. So they're not able, there are states of emergencies, borders are closed, they're not able to move around. I'm talking about economy and employment. They're not able to conduct trade and move as freely as they used to under the population movement. They're not looking to migrate to Europe, they're looking to just look for areas where they can be safe and they can continue to survive. This interruption that security measures have happening, that have had on local communities is severe, and I've seen it and I have heard it from the people that are mostly affected. And we can continue this conversation later on.
Now, fantastic. To conclude the panel, and I've been told that we have to finish. I just wanted to, I come from Brazil, and we always say that we're very optimistic, like he said, about the future and the hope. Now, in one phrase, should we be hopeful about the future? Even though we're living in a time of turmoil.
I need your microphone.
Oh, that's true. Is it working?
It's working now, so wonderful. Well, I'm hopeful.
No, it's not working.
It's not working.
Okay.
I raised my voice.
Something against you, so yeah.
Sorry for that. I'm very hopeful. I do believe that we have seen that over history. That's the advantage of aging. You see things. Terrorism in Russia was a big time. I mean, it was an issue. If you look into it, 15 years ago, nobody talks about it any longer. I'm not talking about the method and everything, but we have seen countries emerging from turmoil. I do think that terrorism is not here to stay. I think that if the international community get its act together, and I think the points that he's making is very important, African armies need to be to have the means to defend themselves. I mean, we cannot subcontract our security to others. That is something, the African Union has to solve. We have to put more budget to our armies. They have to be professional so they can defend themselves. And if within the international scene we can work that out, I think we are going to get rid of that. And if we combine very effective development strategies addressing youth employment, bringing the private sector, making sure that we have a democracy that works, I think this is going to be memory of the past very quickly. But if we are still, lingering around and, each of us having its own little interests, beneath, of course, it's going to be here for long. But I think that we do have the means to get rid of terrorism. We do have the means as a human community to get rid of poverty. That's the thing. I mean, there are a lot of researches that have been made, but it's up to international leadership. It's up to our national leadership and to come back to Africa. Again, we are only doing 3% of intra-Africa trade. Imagine if we raise it to 50%, what it would bring in terms of jobs. So I think we are in turmoil, but there are places of hope, and I do believe we have to draw on that and make sure that we have a better world for the next year to come.
So we should all be hopeful because we'll all be old in the future. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think...
Quickly.
Quickly, I'll make it quick. First and foremost, let me just thank my esteemed colleagues on the panel. It's been an enlightening discussion. And thank you as well for moderating. Thank you to the people in attendance as well, and also the person I co-authored as well, Fatima Azara as well. I want to thank her as well. Yes, there is hope for the future. But what I will say most importantly is that my esteemed colleague to the left said, there needs to be a drastic shift in terms of leadership. What we're suffering from now truly is a lack of creativity from leadership at the very top. What needs to happen essentially is that there needs to be a blueprint that is articulated. People need to see a pathway to prosperity. It needs to say, okay, listen, this is the agenda, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to be implemented and carried out. And what you'll see is that once you can galvanize people behind that, it will automatically root out troublesome elements of society. And then one thing I will end it with is just saying that the surest pathway to peace is through trade. Trade engenders peace. So let's begin to put this enabling environment in place. Show people that, yes, I'm going to the roads, there's infrastructure, all these enabling environments are going to be put in place as conduits to trade. Once that's put in place, nobody's going to want to fight, because everyone sees that, okay, we all have a role to partake and play, not only for only for social mobility, but also towards building nationhood and states and so forth. Okay. So yes, there's hope.
Fantastic. I'm sure you would all like to hear from Rida, Len, and Anabel, but it's your lunchtime. And I'm sure that, whatever they say is going to interrupt your lunchtime and you're going to be very mad. So I wanted to thank the panel for their presentation today. And make sure that you get the magazine, which is outside then. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation this first morning. We will now break for networking lunches and reconvene at 2:30. Please enjoy your meal.
Thank you.
Gracias, Anabel.
Gracias por la moderación.
No.
Me van a tomar una foto, Marcos.
Ah,
Te saludo.
perfecto. Ajá.
Después de la foto te saludo.
Ah, sí, quieren tomar una foto.